Planning Commission meeting.
Oh.
We'll start with roll call. So Drew Folk.
James Whiteside.
Jeanette Ruffle. Allison Miller. Just turn that thing off, just mute it. I'm kidding. Just a minute. You're good.
Colin Forsyth.
Excellent. With no one being online, I think that is the committee this week. So we will start with review of last month's meeting notes. Any discussion points or concerns with last month's meeting notes?
I thought they were thoughtful and detailed. Thank you.
I would entertain a motion to approve.
I move to approve the minutes from last month's meeting.
Seconded.
Excellent. So now we get to move into a interesting discussion topic with unit lot subdivision. So Lilith, I see we have a draft to review. Do you want to go ahead and kick us off with this topic?
Sure, it sounds great. Let me pull it up. So I had looked at another example in your last month's packet was Snohomish, I believe. But since then, there was an article in the paper about Spokane and their successful implementation of the unit lot subdivision and how they have developers already on board using it, planning to use it. So I thought, well, there's something that's actually getting used. Great. I went to their website and looked it up, and it's really straightforward and easy. So I put it in your packet, modified slightly as if it might read for us what it might actually read like. So do you all have access to it, or should I put it on the screen?
Let's go ahead and put it up just in case.
Loading for screen.
Airdrop it to you.
And the link was just to the code, but not the article, is that correct? There wasn't a link to this, there's a link to something else, we'll talk about that. Okay. But the unit lot subdivision's up on the screen right now. I really like the way Spokane put this together. 4 simple sections, a purpose, where it applies, an application process, and then review criteria. So purpose statement does include something more of a definition. So if we were to move forward with this, I'd probably move parent, child, and parent parcel and child parcel into definitions, but they're listed here. To kind of give you the example, a parent parcel would be the original overall site. And once you're subdividing that through this process, you end up with child parcels. And those parcels still have to be consistent with the parent parcel. So in other words, if somebody wants to expand one of the houses on the overall site, it still needs to be consistent with the overall site requirements for setback and lot coverage, that kind of thing. And that helps keep a project proportional to the rest of the neighborhood, right? It's not going to be a larger development, it's going to be what was allowed on that initial site to begin with. And for our purposes, for applicability, I just cited that it would be listed in the district use chart, so we can talk about where we might allow this to be. But first, let's get down to the process. They would submit a application essentially for a subdivision, which is currently defined and regulated under Title 21. And I've listed there what short plat and major subdivision options. If you don't know or don't remember, short subdivisions in the city of Leavenworth are 9 lots or fewer. Major subdivisions are 10, so that's the break point. It's a very similar process, one just requires a hearing examiner to make the determination. And that's through a public hearing process. The other is administrative, the smaller one is administrative. We note here that it's a voluntary program option for the developer. Has to come in on appropriate forms, and then when reporting, it has to include certain special items in addition to maybe a subdivision or clarification from a subdivision process, and that's the list that we're looking at there under item D. Those are notes to go on the final plat, which gets recorded. The review criteria, unit lot subdivision creates a relationship between the parent lot and each of the child lot. They have to meet all of the following standards. So I just threw this in here. The parent parcel shall be no greater than 2 acres. I believe 2 acres is what we have defined for planned developments too, that they can't be smaller than 2 acres. I should look that up. I'm just rambling at that point, sorry.
They didn't take, that wasn't modified.
Okay.
My next number.
Sure. No more crashes.
Way to make an entrance.
So these would be on smaller lots. And that would eliminate very many of them occurring on them as a major subdivision. Not to mention, we don't have a lot of 2-acre parcels in town, period. Accessory dwelling units may be subdivided from the principal structure. So that would probably be the most common use of this. 2 or 3 lots within the parent parcel getting broken up. In any case, parent parcel shall meet all of the development standards for the zoning. I see I missed a PH there. Including but not limited to, and I provided a list of things that I've heard the public say they're concerned about: setbacks, the lot sizes, or the that should probably be lot coverage. Lot sizes are gonna change. Parent parcel needs to meet it, but the lot sizes are gonna be smaller. So. Are there other things you've heard the public say that they're really concerned with? Height, building height, maybe? Things I could just list to. This little section here is meant to give peace of mind to the general public that those things aren't gonna change. So. Hopefully that helps. Maybe I'll change lot size to height. Cause that is something people are concerned about.
Should that enter the code? Question.
I mean, we already have well-established height restrictions. I don't know that every time we define it in every subsection of code, it's just more work to maintain it. I think we default up to the standard, in my opinion.
Cause everything in the, like the existing, like R8, R6, those have height restrictions. And so anything that we're dealing with here would fall underneath that, right? So, okay.
And if it was combined with the cottage housing, then it would
Yes.
fall under
Cottage
that.
housing.
Right.
So I think it would be redundant to have a separate height limit for this.
Mhm.
The PD code was changed to have a 6,000 square foot minimum for affordable housing or 24,000 square foot minimum for other. So it's not a 2-acre minimum for PDs. But I also think that the part of the purpose of this is to make that type, it's a easier route in a lot of ways to a similar development that a PD would allow. So I don't think it matters that there's overlap necessarily. So I think the 2-acre
For the record, plan development.
Plan development.
I was just about to ask for an acronym definition, thank you.
I was going back to the.
Yeah, perfect, thanks.
Yeah, plan development.
Lilith, the Spokane code has a whole separate section discussing ADUs broken out. And I think you've kind of summarized that into one sentence. Is there kind of a reason why you're, was it redundant in your mind, or what was the reasoning there?
Yeah, I thought that didn't need to go into that level of detail. They were trying to regulate them slightly differently, and we just started looking at land divisions that could include ADUs. So I just needed to clarify that this can be done for just 2 units. Access, the parent parcel in each child lot shall make adequate provisions for access. So that could be part of the common area. It could be, if there is common area, there's not required to be common area in a unit lot subdivision. Easement, it could actually, most often would be an easement. Shared across property lines, to get the utilities.
We have 2 utility references too, Lilith.
Oh, do I?
D1 and then H is a utility reference as well.
Ah, perfect, thank you.
And not to stir a hornet's nest here.
No, go for it. This is rough draft. I just did this once.
As we run into issues with interpretations from the county for the ADU, could we potentially add either the the public works director and or applicable utility authority?
Yeah, we could. And same would be true for city engineer. Subdivisions are interesting. I'm gonna reach out to the county and ask them. Those are considered administrative typically, and the county hasn't adopted every city's subdivision regulation. And their last recent interpretation I heard, but not from Dina, was that they weren't gonna be adopting subdivision rules because they're administrative and they don't have to. Any case, under the MOU, they don't have to do adoption of codes that are considered administrative or process related. So,
What could you, does that mean you couldn't apply this code in the UGA?
if they don't adopt it, unless they
Right.
adopt their own. So I'll reach out to them and see how favorable they are or are not to doing this type of code amendment. They do not have a binding site plan requirement for condominiumization either. So I don't anticipate them adopting our requirements for condos because that would increase their processing on their side.
Can you explain the administrative process, like how that's different?
Well, things that aren't related to zoning, subdivisions are just considered kind of a. I don't know what the word is, Maggie.
Mostly administrative means it
yeah,
doesn't have to go to the hearing examiner.
Well,
Like it can be decided by
yeah,
staff instead of.
and in
like
this
the
case, they're
public
all
hearing.
technical, whether they go to a hearing examiner or not, subdivisions still have to meet the underlying zoning requirements, so the zoning requirements are already defined. So they don't have to adopt our process for subdivision, because they have a process for subdivision and all the rules, they'll just look to our standards for the rules, which mean lot sizes are X, Y, and Z. But we're in a new age now where we're talking about unit lot, and those don't meet the underlying zoning and they don't have a real provision. So how can I get them to adopt this, or do we want to get them to adopt this? Now, in the UGA, what would that look like? You know,
At some point, they have to adopt some nature, correct? From state legislature.
I don't know that that state rule applies to the county where they're trying to preserve rural land. That they will allow them to do that, and in the UGA maybe. I didn't read it for that level of detail.
So that's like a jurisdictional confluence situation that we're at, and nobody quite knows because it's still turbid, nothing's settled.
Well, I just haven't read the state law to see what's required at the county level.
Okay,
Yeah,
and
but see,
but for the UGA, that's where they're in the Venn diagram of, under the memo, they're required to follow Leavenworth stuff, but under actual, for a lot of practical terms, they're under county.
so when they're in the urban growth area, the county adopts the city standards. If the county has not adopted something, or if I haven't sent them something to adopt, then that rule just doesn't apply to them.
Because it's all administered by the county.
Yeah.
Everything in the UGA is administered by county.
And so that's where they're like, hey, it's administrative, it's arbitrary, that's not necessarily, we're not bound to follow this, so your process is fine for you, but.
Well, when you're
They're
looking
going
at
to
it,
follow their own process.
yeah,
Okay.
when you're looking at a subdivision, that's a process-driven land use
Okay,
change.
rather than development of it.
Rather than the standards required for it. So the standards are in the zoning code. Your lot sizes are in the zoning code. You might have provisions for street frontage. So if the county, building envelopes, setbacks, if the county's adopted those, which they have adopted our most recent.
Yeah.
So they're gonna look to our standards, but they don't have to adopt our subdivision code in order to do that.
I see.
Somebody can still come to them and say, I want to subdivide, I'm gonna meet all the city standards. They'll go through and do that. Now for Leavenworth, they have adopted one of our subdivision regulations. I think it's quite old. But they haven't done that for all cities, and I'm not at all clear that they would adopt this. And I'm not sure if the state's gonna require them to adopt this. Because I think the state wants rural to stay rural. But I didn't
Yeah.
read it to see about urban growth areas or.
I guess I just interpreted all municipalities and enforcing bodies to mean that, but maybe you're right, maybe that does carve out.
Yeah. Well, I'll definitely peek at that.
Okay.
Okay, rough drafts. Thank you for your inputs. Helpful.
But one more in the, kind of from the Spokane example, Lilith. There's an interesting provision D4, I think that's section D, item 4. Each child lot's area and width for purposes of subdivision may be as small as the footprint of the building situated upon it, subject to the requirements of the building and fire code.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't see that in ours or something similar to that in the draft you proposed. Is that just because we want to maintain setback and force people into the more of the common code we already have established?
No, I like that language. We can add it in here.
I also would like I'm kind of reading that.
That means if they built at a higher standard with fire separation walls that allow them to be closer than 10 feet apart, then they could be.
And I think, so under G in the draft code, it does say building shall meet all applicable provisions of building and fire code. So it's just in a separate section.
Right.
So it doesn't go into the setback, but
I think if we not including that does create, it's interpretation space. So I don't know if you want to close the door or leave it open.
Yeah. I like the Spokane one. We can modify that. And it would and could apply to townhomes. They could own their front and backyard with this subdivision option.
Any other questions or comments from commission?
Just going back to the utility thing, as James mentioned, I feel like D1 is just not necessary And H could probably be a little more generalized and refer, well, but I guess I would need to look at like the Title 14 or whatever that has all the utility codes to be like, what do we need to add to that
Mhm.
that is specific to this? But I mean, regardless, that's for the conversation about the UGA, but even within the city, I think the consistency of referring to Title 14 is probably preferable, and then only adding what we really need to clarify the differences for this type of development.
That's a great idea.
I mean, that does say child lot shall be subject to all of 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18.
Right.
Except as modified. So I guess that is in there. But I feel like in the access section, you don't need the additional separation requirement note.
I'll check 14 to see if we actually need to allow something that's more flexible, especially crossing property lines or what will become child property lines, so I'll check 14. Maybe can make that more explicit.
Yeah.
Well, overall. Would you like me to provide you guys more examples and you can read through those and see if some of the other languages should fit, or how would you like to proceed?
I personally appreciate the cleanness of this. It's pretty straightforward and there's not a lot of redundancy or nuance to it. Because I personally feel like this is a much more powerful tool than some of our other topics this year in terms of ability to kind of create that middle housing opportunity. In my opinion, less is more. I think that this does a good job of summarizing the objectives.
Does this? Sorry, I feel like maybe this is really stupid and I'm just not putting something together. Does this actually allow for greater density, or I mean, this is completely detached from the zoning code. So it still has to follow the density of the zoning code. But it is allowing for smaller lot sizes, but it's not necessarily allowing for more units per parent parcel.
That's correct.
Okay. So it would have to fit. So if you want more than, basically, if you want the child lots to be smaller than 6,000 square feet or smaller than 3,000 with like a house ADU or duplex type of setup, then you have to then use the cottage housing code for the zoning requirements. Okay,
That's fair.
yeah, then I like that it's simple and that it doesn't really, that it can be used in combination with everything else, but doesn't actually. Yeah, I mean, it's like, it doesn't change anything in the zoning code. You still have to meet everything. So,
No, but if for property owners presently that have a house and an ADU, they can now break the ADU off, and that is now 2 owners instead of 1.
Right.
For them. So that does create more opportunity for ownership.
oh, yeah, no, I think it's a great, I think I was thinking that the unit lot subdivision code would have its own sort of zoning component, and I'm like, this has no zoning component.
Like you can't
it
infinitely
doesn't
subdivide or
change.
something.
Right, well,
It's not like
Just
a
the-
cluster.
It
You
doesn't,
don't
yeah,
get
it's
it.
not like a cluster subdivision.
Yeah.
It's like it doesn't affect density. That has to be net within the zoning code. So it's just a really nice tool for like the condo code that doesn't affect density, it just gives you another option for ownership.
From
I
a,
like it.
from a practical standpoint, I mean, I don't. The language is a little bit vague about utilities. Separation requirements for utilities must be met. I assume if you separate an ADU from a house, legal ownership wise, you're gonna have to bring in separate utilities. When is that not, like, I just don't know anything about that. And then the practical, like, is that hard? Does it cost a lot of money?
Oh, yeah.
Cost a lot of money.
10
Yeah,
grand.
it costs a bit, depending on what your
Depending on
bedrock,
how deep the trench is.
depending on your bedrock material.
Yeah, 7
Sure, yeah, I
is the
mean-
quote up there right now.
Well, and you have to pay for separate city water and sewer connections,
Yeah, they'd have to have
which
different
is
meters.
like
and-
$14,000, just the.
So you're looking
Pay for the
at,
connection, not even to like put in the line.
say, 40 grand after the work's done on a relatively straightforward site.
Yeah, this isn't going to be like,
Yeah,
all of a
I'm just
sudden,
curious, I'm
everybody's
not-
like gonna
it's not a
separate off their
problem, I'm
ADUs,
just-
because it's not gonna be feasible.
When
for
people
most
are talking,
ADUs.
you know, but it's like, you know. Splitting up a duplex through condoization isn't practical in a lot of situations. I'm just trying to figure out. For me, what the practicality of this is from a.
Well, a duplex
Owner
would
standpoint.
have completely separate utilities
Sure, but like
already,
if you
so.
don't meet the codes on. They're
Firewall.
like older
Oh, yeah.
duplexes would require
How does
an
your,
investment.
how does grandfathering
Or-
fit in versus like required
Well,
retrofits
I'm
or
just
something? or-
wondering, you know, like. What it's gonna actually take to make this happen on
Yeah.
the ground versus on paper.
You're absolutely right. Older development is gonna have a pretty like a steep upfront cost.
Yeah.
A lot of the newer stuff, it's already required
Is it
to have a separate utility.
for the ADU? That's
Even
right.
for an ADU, yeah.
Well, if ADU is over 900 square feet, 900 to 1200 square feet, has to have separate utilities. So in that situation, it would be pretty straightforward to separate them, or a modern duplex that did have a firewall between the two lines. You could say.
Do we, what is defined as the approximately modern era versus, I don't know,
Modern.
vintage or pre-modern? I don't know. Still quite a ways back.
90s.
Yeah, probably.
and 90s.
Okay.
98, I think was the code that we referenced.
So Colin, I think the outcome of this, there are two outcomes, right? Some people may split lots that are pre-existing with 2 units on them. But
Yeah.
things like Noah Dahlstrom's lot on West Whitman, where he has his little tiny old house that is falling apart on itself, and he wants to, if he builds something that is in his mind right now, like 2 houses on it,
Yeah.
he would probably use this to then subdivide and sell the second to recoup costs to cover the front. But, you know, I see scenarios like that, in my mind being a kind of common use of this code.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it improves the middle terribly, but it might help the middle, might create more market opportunity.
I think it's the entry level
Yeah.
ownership
Yeah.
that's gonna be the biggest boon here, and none of that's gonna be defined as within a margin of affordable. But nothing really is in this town at the moment. But it's that entry level ownership that creates that opportunity for the next rung up the ladder to get into ownership.
I mean, it's like we talked about with condos, like, yeah, condos can be really expensive, but they're also not as expensive as single family residence. And cottage housing, like you can't guarantee that cottage housing is gonna be like super cheap and affordable, but also one 800 square foot unit on a lot with 3 others is cheaper than one house on that lot. And it's the same, like buying essentially somebody's ADU as its own property, is gonna be way cheaper than buying a house. And like, it's not affordable, but it's another option. It's another option that is
Did,
Way less.
did anybody read the attachments that Ken sent?
And before we move on too much, though, I wanna just point out that for the utilities. I used a similar language to condos. I gave the public works director the authority to require them to be separate or not separate. So typically with the subdivision, you put in, a city line to each of the lots, and each of the lots have frontage, and that all kind of goes away with this particular provision. And so existing, we call them spaghetti lines now. We don't want spaghetti lines where you take a city line and you have it going to one house and then you have it going to another house without coming back to the city line. We don't like those spaghetti lines now, but this could have the potential of creating spaghetti lines because they already exist. But that's why I have it in here. It's at the public works discretion, so. We won't really know the impact of the cost. It could be, like you say, anywhere from $25,000 to $50,000. Depending on water line. So, sorry about that, go ahead. You want to move on?
Oh, I was just gonna say, I found in particular the article about trickle down real estate to be super helpful in the case study of Boulder. And I'm not sure if, it looks like that email was sent in response to this agenda packet and this email, so I'm not sure if this is quite the right time for that conversation, but my takeaway from the article is that the one lever of control the city has over development is density, and otherwise we can expect as much that developers will make the most profitable choices for them. And so barring some requirement barring some incredibly altruistic developer who would otherwise probably operate through something like MEND, the city could, require that developments of any size somehow contribute to workforce housing. And it looked like he pointed to some code in Boulder and contrasted that with a city on the west side that seemed quite a bit more cumbersome.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to say I thought those were some valid points, and that this was primarily the reason I abstained from the last vote, because I don't want to just go with the classic economic notion of when you increase supply, you necessarily bring down price because demand so far exceeds that. And so I think it may be appropriate to, consider implications of affordability and, how this all plays into the grander plan for workforce housing. That was just kind of what struck a note with me.
I will challenge you to dig a little deeper down that wormhole.
All right.
I did the same myself. Housing is a human right, has a weird slant and or bent against the so-called YIMBY movement. And they kind of look at the data through rose-colored glasses, where there is consistent study after study that does show that taking the approach of increasing supply does actually benefit, and there are direct benefits to not just the luxury tier, but to the workforce tier and also the affordability tier, even in the short run. So it's not as long of a curve as somebody that even thought. So I kind of went down the same pathway and did a little more homework. So I challenge you to do the same, and I can tell you my opinion changed greatly when I dug a little bit deeper.
Yeah, I hear you. I understand that there could be some, accusations of bias with the YIMBY thing. I think the data they cited about California in particular were powerful. And those are places where, I lived in San Diego, and even just the San Diego of 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago, drastically different. And I think a lot of that has to do with the continued decimation of things that protect lower income housing in favor of developing things for high profit. And I mean, the communities I once knew are now unrecognizable just 5 to 10 years later. And I fear for something similar happening here. And I think that's why, I mean, a lot of the case studies aren't really applicable in a place that has such constrained landscapes and access to, and relatively close proximity to people with so much wealth. And I mean, coming over here, I mean, it's like, maybe if you compared us to Santa Barbara, you know, but even, you know, I don't know, there's no affordable housing in a lot of those communities too. So I fear that unless we somehow create a mechanism that requires investment in a community, we're not going to get it.
Well, I agree with that, but I think, as Drew said, like, I mean, supply and demand is real. The problem is that, like, yes, if you have more housing, then theoretically the cost will come down. It's supposed to. The reason that we don't see that happening in real life is because costs are escalating so quickly and we are so far behind in supply. Like that even as you increase supply, it's like the costs have escalated before you've caught up, essentially. Like that's not something that, like, the only thing that we're doing wrong is not allowing more density to solve that problem. And I am like, that's not arguable, essentially. Like, I mean, it's like the only way to fix that is to build like way more housing than we are capable of, essentially. So since we can't do that, since we can't just, like, you know, build 300 homes next week, to like somehow catch up and bring costs down or whatever. Like, inclusionary zoning, deed restriction, like there's all these tools that I think are really important. And I really think we need like the city needs to do that, you know, community land trust, housing, like all of these things. It'd be awesome to see a lot more of that, but it's kind of separate. It's like, to me, it's not worth holding back something like unit lot subdivision, which could be a useful interim tool and could still help, to wait until we manage to pass inclusionary zoning rules, other ways, like essentially because of our economy in the United States, the only way housing is truly affordable is if it's subsidized. Yeah.
And so, like, I feel like the planning commission is sort of doing the best we can with the tools we have in terms of like creating more options where groups like MEND can come in and use this code to do projects that work better for them. And I don't want to like hold this up to wait until we have some promise of exactly what will happen.
And I'm not saying we should hold anything hostage. At this point, like, this is day one of the conversation. And so I'm trying to just articulate the notions that resonated with me. And for like, I understand the free market economy. You know, in an ideal world, I'm a libertarian free market economist, you know, but also, you know,
You don't want to be a libertarian free market economist.
And you'll never.
That's why I said, you know,
Yeah.
that's why I said, I qualified that. I qualified that with in an ideal world, but that we already are in a tremendously distorted market. And so I'm saying we just counteract some of these existing distortions that otherwise benefit. I mean, in the Boulder Code, they talked about how there's very low and middle income housing that's missing. There's an abundance of high income housing available. All I'm saying is that we give somebody like a little, you know, we jab back as a community to say we need something for people to live here with. And it would be, if you look at the magnitude of the distortions, There are other capitalist forces that are responsible for, I'd say, about 80% of it. You know, I'm saying maybe just we try to distort in a slightly more community-centric manner. Because if our code doesn't do it, what will?
But how do you think unit lot subdivision should be different?
I'm saying this should just be part of the gestalt of density for our city. And there's also the like, as things become increasingly expensive to develop, perhaps that suggests we've reached the carrying capacity of our valley. Maybe we don't have enough water. Maybe we don't have enough resources to support all of the density just yet. I mean, maybe we will in the future, but just if I'm going on just a vibes check here, I'd say the community feels like there's density increasing faster than we have the infrastructure and understanding and regulatory structures to manage.
Does the city think that?
I don't
The
think
city
that's
thinks that?
correct, like that's
That's
not,
perception.
that's not supported by any sort of data.
Well,
And the city has
Yeah,
data to show that we
We're
have
good.
capacity for more development.
and
Well,
also.
and we need that
and a
development in
state-
in order
make
to run it, so-
improvements.
Yes.
And the state mandate to meet the
Yeah.
needs of our growing community.
And we're required under state law to plan for more housing.
So we
and to
have-
plan for population.
So we have all the water we need.
Mhm. Yeah, water is not the problem. Some of our lines need replacing, but new development will help replace those lines.
When you pay your $14,000 for your city water and sewer connection fee, every time you build something new, you're helping pay for the infrastructure costs of those
Mhm.
fixing what we have and increasing the capacity.
Yeah, capacity and infrastructure are satisfied now. We do have issues to work on and Public Works is working on that. The sewer treatment plant will need to get updated at some point. You know, the water treatment plant will decide if we're gonna do a well or update the treatment plant. Then the lines, some of our lines are very older, historic. Some areas were developed off of spaghetti lines. One developer came in and put in their little line and then the neighbor thought they took into that and at some point the city may have forgotten that that was an undersized line. So there's a couple of areas where we've had to upsize the line, but developments paid for some of that. Stafford, Pete Olson's project. He put in the water line and that got extended further down the street and hopefully in the next few years, we'll be able to finish that rest of that street. And that makes that all safer in that corner too, for fire flow, water flow. And then the same would be true over where Borealis was looking at doing some development. There's a water line there that needs to be replaced, or, it's a break in the water system, so for that street in particular, which I believe was Burke. Once we get that water line into, we'll have improvement. The Leavenworth apartments that are going in right now, the Meadows. They're putting in lines that connect our water system and extending the sewer lines, so. They're providing opportunity for future development through that. So the unit lot subdivision is just one tool. The next tool is inclusionary zoning.
Yeah, I definitely want to make sure, thank you for bringing that up, but for example, the Boulder discussion is about inclusionary zoning, so not unit lots.
Not okay.
So that's really the next topic. But I do want to, is there any other comments from the commission around unit lot subdivision? I do want to open up to the public if there's any comment at this time.
The previous code that was just up,
Yep.
Yes, I'm sorry.
a question on I. We brought that up.
Give me a minute to get it there again, 1 second.
You said?
Above zero lot line.
I was, when applicable, zero lot line development shall provide a 5-foot building maintenance easement on adjacent lots for external maintenance and repair.
Shall is a firm wording. Does that mean that the neighboring lot is required to allow that maintenance easement?
Mhm.
That would be
That would be a
on like
thank
a. Well, you wouldn't be able to do that on like an existing developed adjacent lot. That would be like. It would have to be provided for in the parent parcel or within the other lots in the unit lot subdivision. I mean, unless your neighbor. Like agreed to sell you 5 feet of their property, but
That's what I was wondering if this was.
you can't like,
You could take
No.
an easement from somebody.
you can't impose that on an adjacent lot.
When it's a
That's owned by someone else.
subdivision, we can require easement for maintenance.
But I mean, you could only get an easement from a neighboring parcel if the owner of that parcel agreed to grant you the easement.
Yes, that's
Yeah,
true.
You can't,
Here-
you
But
can't like
here,
force it upon
Yeah,
someone.
there's no force.
but here
majeure.
under the unit lot subdivision, the idea was if it's a 0 lot subdivision, they need to provide 5 feet so that the person could actually get there and paint and do repair work.
Yeah.
I think
So,
the question was if there's an existing house on existing lot.
Well, like, so like if somebody
oh,
wanted.
not part of the parent?
You know,
Oh.
So like an
you can't
adjacent
require
parent.
it.
yeah.
Like if somebody did this on the property next to me, they couldn't be like, hey, I need 5 feet of your property for this easement. I could be like, no, thanks.
Yeah,
Keep that on your own property.
yes. That's
Yeah.
true. I'm sorry, I thought you were talking about.
No, they nailed it.
Okay.
Way off.
I like it. So I need them to keep me in line.
Good question. Any other? Go ahead.
So I get it clear in my mind. Okay, so the difference between ADU condo and subdivision, ADU is the parent, the person that owns the lot of ADU, the ADU is a rent or whatever. A condo is both people can own, both the house and the ADU can be owned separately, but the property underneath is jointly owned. Okay, so then subdivision is that each structure and land underneath are owned by those individual people. But all of that, if you subdivide, it still has to land within our current code. So, so I'm looking at like, maybe my lot size is 8,000 square feet, 6,000 square feet, which you could put a house on and an ADU. So then what a person can do is have the option of all 3 of those. It doesn't mean that they could actually then, put in, a whole bunch of condos or, just, build a big, whatever. So then my, question is that not just the same as breaking down to smaller lots? So we can go into, okay, so
It
we're
is.
saying this, we can break anything into a smaller lot. Do we have a minimum lot size? So.
The minimum lot size is essentially dictated by the zoning code because that has rules about density. So in the zoning code, it says, you have to have
Say
a
6,000.
legal lot, 6,000 square feet essentially, to have a house in an ADU. Or like, a legal lot of record that, to have a house in an ADU and you can't put anything additional. You could use the new cottage housing code and that has its own requirements about how many units fit on a parcel based on, the setbacks and the open space requirements and everything else. And, but it doesn't. Yeah, you still have to follow something in the zoning code in terms of how many dwelling units can I put on this piece of property? And how do those dwelling units have to be separated from each other? Like you follow the zoning code for that. And then this is saying that like, once you establish that, like say you want to build a duplex or you want a house in an ADU, and that meets all the zoning code requirements in terms of setbacks, height, density, et cetera, then you can turn those into 2 smaller pieces of property instead of 1, but you wouldn't be able to like do it again, like you could draw a new lot line in between your structures
And put it.
as long as they follow the zoning code.
It's gotta be like a coverage has to do with that, what you need the lot.
So you can't have infinite subdivision in this case, like essentially you hit a point where you can't subdivide any further.
It seemed like, and I had a similar question and train of thought around the cottage housing, and then it seemed like logistically, on say a 6,000 square foot lot, there's no way to meet all the requirements and have any more than 3 freestanding structures. Like, no matter how you cut it with the,
Already on 6,000 square feet.
it's ambitious and ideal,
Yeah.
right? And it like, but
But
like
I'm
considering,
saying 8,000 square foot.
sure,
You could.
but like, but you're not gonna end up with. You're not gonna end up with some asinine number of, you know, like lot divisions underneath increasingly tiny structures. Like, it's not gonna end up being like. It's not gonna be, like, I understand what you're envisioning, I think, and just like logistically, when you apply all of the existing constraints. Like, they wrote the code to enable. Accommodations for like the unique aspects of a plot, you know, maybe it has some weird corners, maybe it has some weird slopes. But, you know, so long as you can like meet the minimum parking, you can provide the necessary, you know, space for snow berms and firefighting and all of that. You know, it ends up that, and you can't have more than 40% coverage, so it's like it's not as terrifying as it might seem theoretically. If you, but I think you, Allison, you were the one who kindly came up with some of the renderings to just say, thought experiment, here's where some of these things could fit. And, you know, when you adhere to the letter of the requirements, it doesn't end up super awful. Yeah.
But.
You know what I mean? Like, it's not ad infinitum.
And I only ask about, you know, I think all this envision with Stafford Street, you know, structure.
Sure.
I think, gosh, you know, that starts popping up on, you know, every lot that's got a small, you know, old house. It's like, we can turn that down, put up, you know, like that, I don't know, complex floor, you know, side by side one. We're looking at, our density being very little walk around, very little backyard, you know, private driveway and, you know, and so then, you know, lots of neighbors, you know, and and I think that a lot of that's over, that it's gonna start to happen, and so that's why, you know, we always have to do well, this isn't good,
Right.
So,
And is there any space for trees? I have the same concern every time.
Yeah, I'm gonna come to you in a second, but I do want to touch on that point. It's a good point. And the reason that I'm excited about this tool is that when you do talk to developers, then they talk about how do I get the ROI on this project?
okay.
ROI, return on their investment. Right now, their option is with the cost of building and the cost of land. Their option is build a $4,000 mega mansion or use unit lot subdivision and build 2 homes. And to me, I'd much rather have a 1,500 square foot, 2,000 square foot parent home and a 1,200 square foot ADU that gets split. And that's 2 houses that are going to be a little bit more affordable than that one 4,000 square foot mega mansion.
And it means one less mega mansion.
And means one less mega mansion, right? So that's why I'm really excited about this tool, because I think it does create an incentive for developers to develop 2 houses instead of 1. And using this, you also get the ability to break these up. And so they do kind of still keep the character of a single family home versus what we see with potentially a condominialization where you might end up with stacked units or combined units that are a little bit bigger, bulkier buildings.
So the subdivision is each one will have a little bit of space around them.
Yeah, they have
Well, they
to,
could.
they could, yeah, they have to meet the minimum lot coverage requirements. So that should, in theory, maintain some additional green space.
Which I mean, but they could beat that if they had a common wall, go side by side, like what we see.
Yeah, I mean, you could do this with a duplex,
Yeah,
where there's a shared wall, but then you still have the like 35% lot coverage requirements, height requirements, all those other things you need to meet.
When come to you next year, but I want to go over here in front. She was first, go ahead.
yeah. Thought experiments about how many fit on a lot. So Lilith and I were mailing about this today. A 60 by 100 square foot lot, you're saying that you're positive that there could be no more than 3 cottage houses on that lot. Is that correct?
Oh, don't, I'm not trying to say anything binding here.
Okay, so I think it's kind of important to have the numbers. And so Allison, it sounds like you did a thought experiment. and you showed how many of those units could go on a 100 by 60-foot lot. Can I see that?
Yeah, it was
It's
in
in the
the packet.
Okay,
It was in the packet for cottage housing, because that was
Okay.
related to cottage housing.
okay, and do you feel like when you did that thought experiment, you took it to the nth degree? Like, do you feel confident
Yes,
that there could be no more than 3?
Okay. How small would those?
I guess it
dwelling
depends how
houses
small
be?
they are. I mean, theoretically, if they had
200 square
Like-
foot.
a 200 square foot footprint, like a tiny home, then
We might get more.
maybe, but even then, with access, I think even in one of the drawings, I showed 3 units, which I think were maybe 600 square foot footprints on a 6,000 square foot lot, 60 by 100. And it actually would not be allowed as I had it drawn within the code, because I did those to talk about the courtyards requirement, about the like 20 by 20 yard requirement. And in that example, it didn't have the yard, which is included in the cottage housing code, that you do have to have that yard. So, between the yard, yeah, you would have really small footprints to fit 3 units on 6,000 square feet of property. It'd be
Okay.
extremely small, yeah.
So when we're talking, so the probably the densest it could be would be on a 60 to 100 square foot lot would be maybe the Stafford example that has, that has 4 full units.
It's a bigger lot.
2 lots,
What's that?
That's 2 city lots.
Is that 260s?
2 separate lots.
2.
Are they 60-foot lots?
They're
Do
six-
you
Each one-
remember?
I think each lot
We'll look
is
it up.
60 feet wide.
I think they're at least
I
60
don't
by.
think each one is 60-foot wide, because I live right by it.
Well, I also think that was before there were setback requirements introduced. I think that perhaps.
No,
I think it was-
that's
I think it was-
The height requirement changed.
Yes, I know.
Yeah,
The setback was the same. That was done, there were 2 60-foot lots,
Yes.
and each
Wow.
lot has a house and an ADU,
Right.
technically, even though they're the same.
Attached. I know.
Yeah, but they're the same size, so they're under.
So I guess what I'm getting at is, and let's just make that a 60 by 100-foot lot, although, 30 is a basic lot in town by 100, but anyway, let's take the 60. So there could be 3 cottages on, just could be. There could be a duplex and an ADU, there could be, I just want to be totally positive what the maximum number of units that could be sold separately would be on a lot that size. And so are we positive it's 3, or could it be 4?
well, it does depend on the size of the units. If they went into tiny homes, your limiting factor at that point would be the driveway and parking requirement, because each unit would require at least 1 parking space, and then in that instance, you're bumping up against the amount of driveway and parking space being greater than the footprint of the house, like about 180 square feet for a parking space. That doesn't include the driveway. So if you were doing
Yeah.
a 200 square foot home, you're gonna run out of
Yeah,
space for
I
that.
just want,
I
I just want to be
know
super
it
comfortable
for
with that
this
number,
piece.
and I'm getting more comfortable now. So it sounds like 3 units would be the maximum, probably the whole bit. And, when you said that, and could those 3 then be sold separately under this new idea?
Yeah,
Okay, so
If-
3 little parcels.
Yeah.
It'd be tough, but in theory they could.
they would have to meet all the cottage housing requirements.
Uh-huh.
And they would have to meet the like utility and access requirements for the unit lot subdivision. So
What's the smallest lot right now that can be built on in town?
any lot that is
Legally established,
legally established, so
actually 75% of that. So, because we do allow for, not,
only if they're several owned together
if
and
they're
you're
a
doing the
couple
boundary
owned
line.
together and there's been built on. So the smallest lot is around 4,500 square feet.
There's some that are under.
Well,
Some
there's
of the
3,000
some of the
lots
older
still,
ones
right?
are even smaller, yeah.
Yeah.
So basically, when Leavenworth was originally platted in 1900 through 1920, whatever, They platted a lot of like 3,000 and 4,500 square foot lots. And those are still legal lots that can be developed like any other single family lot. You can't make a new lot that size unless you're using this, lot subdivision code, but you would still have to meet the zoning requirements, which essentially assume the 600 square foot lot, but
You can't make a 3,500 square foot lot.
No.
no, you can't do that.
I mean,
Because I know there's a lot of,
Yeah, so if it already exists, you can do that, and something that will often happen is multiple 3,000 or 4,500 square foot lots are owned by one person.
yeah,
And and maybe they've developed one of the lots, and then they can sell those two other lots separately. Say they own 3,000 square foot lots, that's why you still see like new lots or new development on really skinny lots, because, because those lots already existed. And
But they still have to meet setback on the 30 lot.
Sure,
which is
sure.
the
Yeah,
nearest
that's interesting.
And lot coverage.
One less mega mansion, that's bad, mega mansions are bad, we are making a judgment call on that, and I actually don't know what a mega mansion is, like, I live on 100 by 60-foot lot, I don't have a big footprint on that. So just because someone has a bigger lot doesn't mean they're gonna build a quote mega mansion, and what does that mean?
we were talking about that it is more lucrative for a developer to build the maximum size house that they can on a given piece of property if they are building that house to sell it and make a profit.
I get that, but I said we don't want more, no, we don't want more mega mansions, so is there a value judgment about the size of the house in town within this group?
Well,
That you were not in favor of people building?
I feel like you're putting a
We're
lot,
going way off.
put a
We're
lot of
going way
words
off.
on out here, so let's take a step back and.
No,
I think you would have to
I
talk
did
to each
put-
one of us individually.
Those are,
Oh, okay.
those are individual opinions, not the pen.
okay, good, I didn't know, because someone said we don't want more mega mansions, and I.
From a density perspective, from a density perspective, is that not true?
and I mean, from a density and affordability perspective, I would
Yeah.
prefer
Perspective,
to see
there's,
It's
not like. Yeah, I would
maximum.
personally
build out.
prefer to see houses that do not like absolutely maximize a parcel.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, we
I
have
mean,
heard
it
that from a lot
happens
of
and we
the
don't have rules
public
against it,
too,
so
that
that's.
the
Is
maximum
what it is.
house built out on the lot size is not
It's too big.
visually appealing, Pine Street, people.
Well, I don't like
And
it
it's
myself,
but-
More expensive.
Yeah.
And it's not as
But-
high density.
Yeah, they all play a role in housing, the mansions down to the cottages. So we're just, I think, we've been tasked with increasing density, increasing the diversity of the housing stock and the number of housing units. So,
You've been tasked to do that, you've been tasked to.
In our docket.
By the
But-
council.
By our
or
docket.
In the docket, is that?
the docket,
Yeah, okay, well, you and I have been talking about the docket.
yeah, too.
Okay, and then, I found a calculator, which was about affordability. And it was on Zillow, so, I think it's probably fairly valid. And what you can do is you can plug in your annual income and then see what kind of home you need. And so when you talk about something becoming a little more affordable, it would be nice if we could get to actually affordable. Because to me, a little more affordable doesn't meet the mark of becoming affordable. So for instance, on Zillow, I don't have with me, but something like if you bought a house for 350,000, which in this town would be a small house, probably. Yeah, footprint.
It doesn't
It'd be a condo.
It would be a.
But, well, I mean, it could be one of those little guys, a little cottage or something, it's possible. You could get one for
In the future, sure.
tiny, yeah, right, yeah, it doesn't exist. Anyway, the income needed for that was like $120,000 a year or something.
Yeah.
So although you talk about more affordable, I want accountability about truly affordable, because I want to
So-
justify.
That
Yeah,
requires subsidies.
yeah, so basically,
which is-
basically there's,
Which
is
is
beyond-
beyond, beyond the
there's
purview of.
not a tool or a policy or code change we can put into place that could create that unicorn. So what
I
we are
agree.
trying to do is use every tool that we can create to get closer to that need as possible. Allison said it earlier. In our current state, the only way to actually have affordable housing is through subsidy.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I just want to be super clear that getting closer is not, in my opinion, is not close enough because it creates a change in our community, which I think.
Who will
that's
you
fine.
vote for in the next election?
What's that?
Who will you vote for at the state level in the next election?
Why are you asking that question?
That's like, we're going down a rabbit hole now, which we cannot solve here. You're asking about
Our
personal
state
politics.
legislators are the ones
The state
who-
legislature
they
controls
don't have no say.
subsidization in the state.
It's a
This,
rhetorical
this
question.
group won't have
I
any
think
say in that.
Well,
One thing to bear in mind, Rona, is that we have no mechanism to affect funding. The city council does, the state legislature does, other organizations, but under our purview, we cannot implement, funding for affordable housing. So
Right.
what we're trying to do is to create a scenario where there are good places to apply funding if that ever comes available.
So like,
But-
want to change
currently-
code so that maybe.
The reason I said it was to get closer to affordable. The reason we're very careful about not saying affordable
Right.
is because oftentimes what we do gets misconstrued. How come you did this change and we don't see affordable housing all of a sudden? It's not a reality that we can impact. But we are using every tool in our toolbox and making every policy change that we can to create the opportunity should funding come into place. Or, and to Allison's point too, like not only do we need to add more workforce housing and add more affordable housing, we also need to keep pace at all rungs of the ladder in terms of development. And so that's what we can control is the policy and the code amendments that we put forth to the city to approve or deny. But there's nothing that we can control personally. So that's why we're very careful about what we say when we use the word affordable, because it's really just not something that we can obtain.
Yeah, I think that's changed. I mean, I think the language used to be more about affordable and workforce and it was used more liberally than it is now. It sounds like that's being dialed back. I think I'm understanding that now.
We are not, it has nothing to do with our desire or motivation to support affordable housing. We can't fund it essentially,
We can't
That's
write
not-
code.
We have no purse. We don't
So-
have the purse.
so
to-
I'm excited about
Rock
unit
Congress.
lot subdivision, because unit lot subdivision is essentially an even easier way for men to create more community land trust housing like they already have in town. Like in the past, they've used the plan development code to do that, but the unit lot subdivision code in combination with cottage housing would potentially be an even easier and more effective way for them to do those types of actually affordable developments. So again, we're like, this is a great tool, which will hopefully come into play for affordable housing development. But it also can be used in a variety of other ways, because it is a tool to increase our housing diversity as well.
I guess the last thing I'd say is, I know you don't have funding and I understand how you're structured. I guess the last thing I'd say is, I hear from what I think is a lot of people, and sometimes it's the thoughts of me, that they're not comfortable with what's happening with density. And so I wonder if you, as a group, feel that you can think about the consequences of density and how it changes our community. Or do you feel like that's something that you don't consider because you have a mandate to create it, and so it doesn't matter what kind of impact it has? I've actually been thinking about this in the last week. Do you think about what it means in terms of how a neighborhood feels if it's denser, or is that not relevant to your structure?
Let me just say, we can't go down the line and have every single one of us give our personal opinion about that.
I just,
And or
need to say it out loud.
the anecdotal feedback that we take into account. I can only speak for myself, and I'm just gonna keep this short because I do want to get to Sharon's
Yeah,
question.
sure.
That, no, we take it all into account. We look at the docket, we hear the community feedback. The reason we have this open forum is for the community to give us feedback. The reason we have public hearing sessions is so the community can go on record and have their opinions heard. So all of it is taken into account. But when you say, I hear a lot that the community isn't happy. I hear the community isn't happy, we're not doing enough. That we're not going faster and harder and more aggressive with it. So it really, that's all anecdotal. That's not data driven. So we really try to keep it within the realm of what we know to be true with the facts that we have in front of us. Take the community comments as they come in and help us guide our decision making. But
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Can I
Yeah,
also
understand
just-
people would tell me something, they tell me something, I totally get it.
I just wanna also remind you, I guess, that like we all live here. Like, you have to live in Leavenworth to be on the planning commission, just like you do to be on the city council. And so like this is my neighborhoods that I live in, and I really do care a lot about how these things affect the neighborhood. I think that is fair to say about everybody, that like we live here and we care because it is our own town, so.
Well, it's a problem, it's a problem all over America, and there's different sides, and I've been really sick since I got on board in the council, and I rarely come in here. So I've sort of been saving up, I mean, come here tonight and say something, because I almost never do, so anyway, those are some of the things that I've been thinking about, and some of the things that people tell me. So thanks.
yeah, thank you for your comments. Sharon, I do want to get to you.
Before I ask the question, honestly, the feedback I hear is that they don't think it's fair anyway. So they don't care to get involved because they think it's fair. Okay, my other question is just with I. Is there something else in I that explains what you said, Lola, or is it just I? Because as reading that, I think it can be challenged by a person that thinks they get to use your lot as their adjacent lot. So I would like to see more clarity for that.
Okay, yeah, this is just my first round draft.
Yeah, I just wanted to.
Yeah, that's helpful, yeah, I'll definitely be given the whole document.
It is also important to remember that the way easements work is like the easements have a grantor that's saying you are allowed to use this space, and the grantee that's allowed to use this space. And both of them have to sign on to the easement to create it. So you can't,
And the purpose of the easement
yeah,
is defined. It's
Yeah.
not like they can do anything.
so you, like. It's impossible to create an easement without the agreement of all property owners involved.
Well,
It's not possible.
even just add that because this says.
I mean, that's what part of the definition of easement.
Lots which there will be to be paid.
But if your concern is that you're gonna be steamrolled because some developer bought the lot next to you
What
and
happens?
all of a sudden you're beholden to that, that's not the case. You have
It's not
to
possible.
mutually agree.
Yeah,
They would not get their plan approved.
But there won't be anybody. And there's an issue that comes up.
Mhm.
over.
Good point. Been multiple questions around that one topic, so I think it's worth looking at alternative.
Drew, I had one question.
Yes, please.
And that was on H, so. This thing about separate utilities. This sounds like somehow the director may require separate utilities, but maybe not.
Yeah, because sometimes utilities can be managed, as Tom Wackelberg explained it to me, independently on the site between the owners. So they have like private meters that they put behind the city meter. So the city will get all of the revenue for the water use, But the bills behind that meter are divvied up between the individual uses. So
Yeah,
this code and the condo code are written similarly based on Tom's recommendation to give them most flexibility.
It's gonna come down to the infrastructure that's existing there. If you've got a half-inch water pipe coming in, you're gonna probably need a second utility. If you have a 1-inch water pipe, you might be able to split that on site.
So like with condos, that means, I was thinking like, if you. This has this got to do, did I miss something? Does this got to do with not condos? This isn't a condo code?
No, this is unit lot subdivision.
Oh, totally different.
They're different, yeah.
Okay, I mean,
For
It's another-
utilities, they have a similar language.
It's another ownership structure,
Mhm.
okay.
but it is different.
Okay, because with condos, if you kind of minimize the ADU in a home, and you condominialize, then you have to have separate utilities, right?
Not the discretion.
Or not?
Depending on
Not
the
necessarily.
You could have an HOA structure where you just jointly pay.
Oh,
In theory,
okay.
yeah.
You pay a percentage based on the size of your unit most often, if you're sharing.
I guess I was thinking a way to not make it get overdeveloped was that there's a cost, but didn't you mention like 14,000 per hookup or something?
Yeah, at least, yeah.
You gotta cross the street to get to the water main, yeah,
Okay.
it's,
Yeah, so it's a way not to make this thing get too widespread. It was like for an older structure to get condominiumized, one of the things was as a it's a way not to have it done too many times or to spread too quickly was that you'd have it hook up separately. Because of the cost, that might change somebody's mind to do that. And so I was thinking that was a good thing. But this is I thought this is for condominium stuff that you have to do that, but this is not
Yeah, it's a different,
different animal.
yes, slightly different. So with this one, they can own a portion of the land with the unit.
Okay,
And the condos, they have common area space, it's owned in common.
good enough. All right, thanks.
thank you. We are 20 minutes past the hour, but I'd like to, if we can, do a quick walkthrough so that we're ready to kind of tackle this the next meeting.
Yeah, we will tackle this the next meeting and I'd strongly encourage planning commission if you can, if you're able. To take, even 30 minutes of your own time and give this a try and run through it. I'm just gonna highlight some of the items. Inclusionary housing calculator. You can launch this, you can create an account if you like, or you can explore as a guest. Creating an account's kind of nice because they'll summarize everything you do at the end and send it to you, and you can name each one and you can see where you change the options and how it changed the outcome. Okay, so I'm here to learn is where I'm gonna show you where Leavenworth is a low rise, low rental. We are not at the point where our land costs and everything is medium or high rise, so any case, low rise condo is where we'll start with today. We do have a strong market, but I encourage you to run through these if you have time, or we can do that in more detail next time. When I enter my new project, you can do a tour and they'll walk you through the various aspects of what the tools are on the screen. They start us off with an overview of a project that is not feasible. So you see that right in the top here, not feasible. Profit is too low, but there is a profit. But it's 9.6%. And for all the factors we put into this situation, I think the break even is 10. You can actually adjust your profit level using one of the questions at the very bottom. So there's different options here, like click more. And there's the period of initial loan, there's a ratio cost. There's a construction loan fee cost. So the more you know about the cost of a loan or the cost of the development, you can play with these numbers. But one of these drop down buttons is also percent of affordability, and so you can change that number as well. What I learned in our area is that the smaller builders who tend to build in Leavenworth need a profit margin near 20% to be profitable, because they don't build a huge number of homes. And huge might be, more than 50 or 100. But as you get into larger developers, I was just telling the city council, this Hayden Homes is a new developer who is trying to break into the Leavenworth market, those Chelan and Douglas counties. And they were telling us that their profit margin is less than 10%. So, but they build a lot of homes in many jurisdictions, and they have streamlined their processes. You pick the home that you want. And they've worked with suppliers so that the materials they need come pre-cut and pre-bundled for that structure. So because they're so big, they get to do all these little tools and tricks, and that really helps them maintain a lower profit margin than our local builders might. So in any case, running through some of the high ticket items here, this is a 30 unit per acre. Almost a 3/4 acre lot. And it required 38 parking spaces. Well, we know right off the bat, we're not doing 30 unit developments. We'd be really lucky to have one of our small developers actually just do 5, but let's put in 20. Our site area could be 1 acre. And that means, because of the parking and everything else, we're gonna talk about multiple heights, so this might actually occur in maybe one of our commercial zones. Since our multifamily is so small and already built out. Parking ratio, we are very lucky in our community that we can reduce that number. A lot of communities have higher parking standards that they are trying to reduce. Affordability. Total number of units. Now, this is an inclusionary model, so we were talking about saying we want 10% of all units to be affordable, so I'll put in 10 here and see how that pencils out.
Is that measure 120% of AMI, or or is that a settable function?
It's settable, but I think it's at 80 as an initial, which is pretty close to our state law. We don't require a fee. Our area median income right now, I believe, dismiss is 87,000.
For a family of 4?
That's family of 4
It's individualized, right?
is 81,000. I just looked it up today and it was 57,000 if you were a single. That was 80% of the AM. Construction costs in our area are higher than 250. We ran this with the city council. We kind of stuck with the 250 to be conservative, but we're closer to 3 or higher. The land cost per acre. Yes. So an acre has 43,560 square feet. Right now, a 4,000 to 5,000 square foot lot is going for 280,000. So if I just say a 5,000 square foot lot, and I'm going to times that by the 280,000, and I'm going to get almost, it's 2.4. Thought you could see me doing my numbers there. Can't. 2.4 million for lot. Our construction loan rate is 7%. Loan to cost ratio, we're going to use their number. That's something we didn't talk about, but there is a loan to land ratio rate with which banks are willing to provide money for projects. So that's why having a high land cost means a bigger house, mega mansion, because they're trying to reset that balance and make sure that they can get the loan. And the bank won't loan for a $300,000 lot and a $300,000 home. They won't loan on that. The ratios have to be different, and generally 70%. So this is a quick loan, only 36 months. That means I need to get my permits in and out, and I need to start construction right away. Initial loan fee, we'll just leave that at 2%. Average outstanding balance, I'm just gonna leave their number there. And then you can see right now our project's in the negative, it's not even making a profit. Required profit, even if I go down to 5%. Let's see, that's 6 now. Still says a good amount. Probably because you're losing money. We saw them come out. Oh, we're -6, that's why. So I'm gonna have to go down further. So in order to make a project like this one pencils, we'll increase the number of units. And there we go. We're at profitable but not feasible. Because we're only making 2.4%. Even our biggest builder just came into town. Wouldn't build for that profit. So then I need to go maybe to 35 units. No, didn't get us there. Oops, I'm not good. 40 is not gonna get us there either. Not 7. There you go. 40 units. That changes the overall project and they do the calculation. It means 40 parking spaces. It means almost a full acre of land. Play with those numbers. You know, if I reduce it from 10% down to 5% of the units need to be affordable, where does that land? Just keep running with the numbers, and my goal is to run through a few thought out scenarios and PDF those so you guys can look through those and compare them.
And just to be clear, this is all based entirely on the financial considerations of somebody developing, right? It's like, it doesn't mean that it's something that could actually happen here, not like, where would there be an acre where you can meet all the setback requirements and build 40?
Well,
Right.
the height would be an issue at 40,
No.
because you just wouldn't have enough.
So
room.
but just to be clear, this calculator is, we can run the math, but then the logistics are another consideration. Okay.
Yes, as we move into inclusionary zoning, we have to start thinking about what does that mean to us in terms of percentage that we might require to be affordable. Are we making exceptions, reduced parking, for example, is one that some municipalities use. So it's just a tool for us to kind of play with some different variables to see where it might make sense for us and when we lay out our inclusionary zoning plan.
Yeah, if I go back to 30 units, but I say there's no parking required. It's profitable. It's above, well, we brought the profitability all the way down to 5%. So at 7.5%, we would need a bigger outside developer, like the ones we have doing the Wagner Apartments. And by the way, their land costs skyrocketed. Not only did they pay a lot for that land, but they had to do a lot of soil amendment, which they anticipated.
Which is why MEMS didn't build affordable housing on it in the first place.
It certainly was a part of the
That
puzzle.
was part of it.
Yes,
Was the development cost of that piece of property was very high.
very, very high. So,
That can become big.
Kind of seems to be a recurring theme with properties still available for development in Leavenworth. It's not an easy build.
yeah,
So Lilith, we talked about, you know, basically cash in lieu of
yeah.
affordable units or.
We're gonna have to do an analysis of what that is. I was trying to ask the attorney if we could just have a future developer do it at the time that they wanna do the project. And so it sounds like we have to do an analysis of what that cash fee in lieu of might be. But I definitely would want it to occur again at the time of the development because things are changing so dramatically. But under state law, it has to be proportional to the actual cost of that unit.
That's mostly what, in terms of this calculator, that's kind of what I was
Mhm.
trying to get at.
Yeah, so I know when they did the apartments behind Safeway, each unit cost for them at that larger scale. I think it was just under $200,000 per unit. That's just an average, right? Small and big ones.
That was finished. Oh,
Yeah.
sorry.
Yeah, finished cost per unit on those, and I don't know what it is here. I imagine it's a bit higher. In part because of the land, but in larger part because costs have gone up in general,
Yeah.
so. But requiring them, say, I've changed the numbers here to 5% affordable and 1 parking space each, right? Cause we know we're gonna have to have parking. So put that back in the equation, but went from 10% to 5%. Just barely over our 5% profitable margin, so it did drop it. But that would mean the number of units here, 5% and 30. Anybody have better, quicker mental math? I don't.
5% of 30.
Mhm.
1 unit.
1 unit.
Yeah, it's 1 unit. Yeah.
It is, it's 1
Yeah.
unit, it's less.
It's not even 1 unit.
It's a
like-
half
it's a
a unit.
percentage of the unit. Yeah.
So, but anyway, we would require the 1, so they'd give us 200,000. And then we have to have in place, what are the tools and how do we manage that money and where does it go? And
Yeah.
what's the time frame for using it? Fee and lieu processes usually have a time frame for using. Okay, so there's a lot of details left to work out. But the main thing here is just identifying what's a reasonable percentage.
Great.
Mhm.
Thank you. Seems like we're at a natural breaking point. So any last comments from the commission? From the community? Thank you. Yeah. Okay, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I motion to adjourn.
Second.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Were you in the Navy?
No. My father was.
Okay, you got the stars.
In the nautical stars, yeah.
It's not a thing. Or is it just kind of a
Frog too.